Well, good afternoon. My name is Austin Royce, and I am here today talking to you about cultivating resilience through change. And I thought we could just kick off by discussing a few learning objectives. So my hopes are by the end of this training that you'll be able to, one, see change as an opportunity for innovation and resilience. So there we're making that direct correlation between change and resilience. Number two is to see change not as something to be feared or resisted, but just as something that's a part of our world that we all have to deal with. And when I'm talking about resistance, I'm talking about that internal resistance that sometimes we have that's usually accompanied by that fear. And then number three, understand that resilience is not something innate. It's constrained by structural determinants at times. And this is bringing the social determinants of health into the framework where we're looking at obstacles and barriers to resiliency. And four is we're going to identify some strategies that will help you aid change in the workplace, especially if you're a manager. So to kick this off, I wanted to share this quote. And this is from Audre Lorde, who is known for her quotes on resilience. And she said, "Self-care is not self-indulgence, it is self-preservation." And what's interesting about this quote is that she's talking about resistance in face of societal pressures and injustices. So before we talked about resistance as something internal that can impact our resiliency, here she's actually talking about resistance as an external force that we could combat when dealing with resiliency and self-care. So some tips to promoting this kind of resiliency for individuals is to create a wellness plan for yourself and encouraging others to create a wellness plan. And then strategizing with your community about meeting your needs and the needs of others. And then organizations, us at Public Health, we have an important responsibility, and we, like I said, bring the social determinants into the framework. So we want to encourage and fund assets or supports to resiliency. And what that means is we're providing the access. We're not and we're working on that external resistance that people might face towards their resiliency. And so we can also require that applicants for grants demonstrate awareness of structural barriers to resiliency that recognize that it's not innate. So what we're getting at here is we want to avoid contextualizing resiliency with a personality trait rather than viewing that as access to resources. And we want to avoid ignoring, we don't want to ignore structural barriers that constrain the ability of people, especially those in marginalized communities, to engage in health promoting behaviors. So now I wanted to kind of talk more about that internal resistance to change that we described earlier. So for this definition, we can look at resiliency as someone's ability to bounce back from change. We can recognize that resiliency can be taught and modeled. If it's done well, people recognize the benefits of change. And then as a leader or leaders saying that it will all work out, we can recognize that that's not very helpful to people. And there are techniques to help people cope better with change than without any support at all. And so a couple more key points about change as a whole is that change is an essential element of our world, so we have to accept that. And change affects everyone differently, so there is no normal, but what is the same is adapting our attitude sometimes to change is something we can all do to increase our resiliency when in the face of changes. And we can see change as an opportunity for resilience and innovation. And we could also identify strategies for accepting and implementing change. So change is all around us. Now, I want to discuss some different situations. So would you resist a raise in your salary or an increased vacation allowance? Would you resist being given a new car? My thoughts are you'd probably say no. So what am I getting at here? The thing is, if it's our own idea, we're usually good at adapting to change, but people still resist change. So why is that? Sometimes it's related to that belief that they may lose control or something valuable to them. And Daryl Connor looks at this in detail, and the Connor model looks at, you know, people have a need for control, and then needs can be met by anticipating the future, and then we establish expectations based on what we anticipate. And then if reality matches our expectations, people feel in control. But if reality doesn't match expectations, people lose a sense of control. So once we can understand the forces dictating this internal resistance, we can become a master of the method. And then our focus changes to developing resiliency. And Connor says by approaching change in a disciplined manner, we can become architects of our future. So what does change look like, that internal resistance? So that might be illustrated here as people feel immobilized, people feel angry, people feel depressed, right? So there's all these active and passive responses to change, to our emotions. And there are strategies, though, that can help support people with resiliency. So the first thing we have is positivity. And so we're going to use this example. Say your job assignment has changed. So we want to recognize our attitude is everything here. Our attitude's crucial. Rather than thinking this change means I have to do more of X and I don't like X, we want to think about the new opportunities that will arise as a result of the change. And then as a supervisor to teach the skill, what you can do is meet with your team individually or as a group and have them raise the negative aspects of change and then have them reframe each statement as a positive. And then your positives list is at least as long as the negatives one, and people will learn to reframe things for themselves and then start to believe what they're repeating. And he says this might feel awkward at first, but encourages people to stick with that approach. The second thing we can do is focus. If we stay focused on the change itself and what we can do to manage it, then we're not worrying about things that are out of our control. And we can start thinking about the stage of the transition is, right? Mastering that method. So we're focusing on resiliency, but focusing on what stage we are in the change, you're also validating people's feelings because people have a right to have their own feelings about change. But what you can do as a supervisor is teach your staff to recognize where they are in the model. And there's more than one change model. You can focus on the action plan or an agenda, and that will help block out distractions or negative gossip. So we're starting with a positive attitude, and then we're focusing on the things we can control. Next is flexibility. Change, if you're adaptable, is much easier to embrace. So think of ways that you can adapt or things that you can do to make the change easier if you're an individual. So like dealing with the job assignment example, you could identify training that you might need or questions that you'd have. And then if you're teaching this or reinforcing this concept with your team, the advice here is to celebrate when members of the team are demonstrating success, when they're being flexible, when they're taking risks, when they're experimenting, and that will have an effect in the culture as a whole. And so we have our positive attitude, we've got our focus, we have our flexibility, now we have organization. So if we put the changes in context with the rest of your schedule and your approach to work, then we're looking at things in a more logical way and it becomes less personal and easier to handle. So to teach this skill, we want to have staff create and update their plans. And this might involve training in time management, personal productivity, or project management might even help. And then we want to be proactive. Change that comes as a surprise is harder to deal with than things that we can prepare for. So this really is bringing attention to that communication. So if you address change early on and modify expectations, it's easier than dealing with change in the later stages. And then helping those around you, like I said, keep the lines of communication open, communicate what you know, even if you know it may change soon and you don't have the full details, because that way you're setting expectations on when people can receive updates and how things might change. So what we talked about was the Connor model. Here's more information about that. There are other change models if you need something to show your team where they're at in the change process. I like the 4-room house model. If you're a manager and you want to understand more mastering the method of innovation, you could look at Everett Rogers' diffusion of innovation model. And then if you're more interested in what I talked about earlier with external resistance and wellness plans, there's a wellness plan template there for you as well. So thank you very much.